Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sphere of Being, the podcast where it helps us show up, optimize ourselves. And you know what? We can all think sometimes, really, do I have to? Or something awful could happen. Unfortunately, people pass away, divorce happens, things happen with our health. And where we think we were all on top of things, that can suddenly seem to unravel before our eyes. And it takes somebody to perhaps help us back onto that track so that we can flourish and thrive again, especially if we're employees of a business. And today I have the most amazing relationship consultant. Celia Conrad deals with things like bereavement and life-changing events within business. She is certified and has many accreditations within her multidiscipline faculty. She's absolutely amazing. She is a best-selling author and public speaker as well. She's very well respected and renowned in her particular field. So she deals with people like CEOs, HR managers, and well-being teams to help employees, as I say, navigate and come through the other side with life-changing events. So, Celia, welcome. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Delighted to be here today.
Oh, wonderful. Now, it's a very important and valuable subject because often I think sometimes people try and hold things in, and the best thing that we can do is often to talk about them to the detail that we're ready to. But I'd like to think about what stage do people like CEOs, HR managers, and well-being teams, when do they start to get you involved within this process?
Well, this is a really interesting question because it comes down to awareness. And it's a subject when you talk about loss, it isn't something that people necessarily want to think about, but it's something that impacts people inside and outside of the office. And often it's a case they might be, say, reviewing wellbeing policies and they realize they have a gap in their policy, but it's more likely that somebody like me is contacting them and asking them about their wellbeing policies, and then they actually realize they have a gap in the policy. Or there's a situation where there's been a disaster at work, something's happened, and they realize that this is something they're not actually covered for, or their staff aren't trained for. Because dealing with people who are going through loss and life changing events is actually very difficult if you're not trained to do that. And it's a lot to expect of managers. And so training is really important and raising awareness within, an organization.
And with regards to, you say, it's very difficult and challenging to deal with people who are going through that. How can people who are in a managerial position spot the signs and hold that space for people?
Well, again, you see, there are so many variables. So, for example, that comes down a lot to the organization and training and awareness of managers. So, it's about knowing your staff, knowing your team. So, if you're a good team lead, you'll always be pretty aware of workflow of your staff, how they are, what's really going on with them, and you will be more observant about things that maybe, they're not there, they're present, but they're absent. And or they might be off sick or they're not telling you things that are going on. And then you have to be cautious how you approach people because not everybody wants to talk about things. The first thing that normally happens is you notice, say, work performance has gone down, productivity's gone down. So, instead of thinking, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing this? It's like, what's actually going on with you? What's happening that might be impacting that work performance? And I think as well, in terms of education, I think employees who have, say, information on backs of even toilet doors, saying that if you have an issue, contact, because a lot of people don't know who to talk to. And they're frightened of talking to someone if they think, oh, they're going to think that I'm making a fuss or I don't want it to jeopardize my role here or my if I'm going to be absent or things are happening, I don't want other people to know. So there's always those things as well, because it depends on what the issue is as well. on how you deal with it. So you're going to deal very differently for someone who's had a bereavement, say loss of, say, a parent, loss of a child, someone who's had a miscarriage, someone who's going through a divorce. So many different, or someone who's had an injury, thinking about people returning to work, how are we going to manage? There are just so many variables. And that's what's quite overwhelming for someone who's thinking, well, how do I create a policy on this? How do we have consistency across all these various things? And a lot of it will be, well, you can have certain things, but there will be amount of discretion as well.
And how can people think about, well, what they do have an employee? I suppose that there's taking things into context, isn't there? Is any kind of change which just seems incongruent to how that person has normally shown up. How would you advise the first steps of that to be taken? Because you're not there, so
Mm.
your expertise needs to be learnt so that then they can put that into practice. What would be that first initial step?
I think there's a lot of things that can be done in terms of information. So, when you're even when you're onboarding staff, it's about things that they are aware that the employer can have to support them going through various stages of their employee journey. So having something on your company intranet about, various things like if you're experiencing any of these issues, who to reach out to, that's quite a good thing to do because it's there, but it's not direct, but it's there. Also, I think, in terms of employee benefits, because these are benefits, it's like what what is actually open to them, what options do they have if they have various issues. And then of course, yes, in terms of being conscious of what your employees need on a day-to-day basis, I think a lot of it comes from coming through actually asking your employees what they want. Doing surveys amongst your staff is actually very useful. And I think, again, the training for managers so that they can notice, because negative coping skills, somebody's working very late or somebody's turning up for work late, both ends of the spectrum there. Someone who is obviously, not really fully present, someone who is absent a lot, someone who's sick, doesn't seem to be, work suddenly drops down. And there is not necessarily, well, what's going on with that person? Is there an issue there? And, maybe having a chat and saying, are you okay? Is everything? And people might say yes, but then you can, just have to observe. And there will be instances, obviously, when people will then have something when they'll be saying that they have had a bereavement or a loss, which will be something that the employer then can help with. And again, considering all the different scenarios that we could come up with, and just being open to what might happen in your organization, because you don't know from one day to the other. If you think about it, there's about 8 million people going through a bereavement at any one time in the workplace. Now, that's about the loss of a loved one, but loss, of course, covers, as I always say, loss and life-changing events. So divorce, these are loss, breakdowns in relationship, illness, disability, the fact that you might be a carer for someone, all those things. So life transitions are all losses. So I always say to everybody, I challenge everyone to tell me if they say they have never been through a loss, because there isn't anyone I've met who's never had a loss.
Interesting you talk about carers because I think it's almost 2 million people every day have their lives changed overnight because somebody who you're carrying that you end up caring for could have had a stroke. They could be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's. And you know then that that could be something which is going to be for many years into the future, or that a parent
Yes.
dies and the other parent needs looking after. Um, how would you say, as far as the age demographic in businesses, is there sort of typical or more typical things that happen to maybe the more mature within the workforce, stroke the younger people in the workforce?
I think yes, if you will look at it statistically, probably the 40 plus bracket, you will probably find a higher instance because then they'll get more divorce, then you'll start getting the bereavements of parents, all those things coming in. But again, there are variables. I was someone in the workforce who had, I'd lost my father at a very young age, and then I lost my brother. And then, I then became a carer for my mother, really, on and off. And that's when I went sort of part-time working because I couldn't manage working full-time. And then when I lost my elder brother, I actually left a job to be his carer when he had cancer. So again, it depends, but I would say yes, in answer to your question, I would say probably 40 to 60 probably is, the highest age range, and so the bracket, the highest level um, of case scenarios in terms of loss that I'm probably looking at in a workplace. Yes.
And with people having to leave because they just don't feel that they can adequately care and keep the job at
Mm.
the same time, do you know roughly how much is lost, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of knowledge that
Well,
leaves the business?
Well, exactly, because the thing is, everything's always quantified in terms of the monetary level that we're losing. Billions of pounds are lost through divorce, and 51 billion pounds or whatever lost through for so many years going on after these incidents happen, like 4 years after divorce's productivity drops. But actually, yes, in terms of knowledge base, because if you think about someone, say, and I come from a legal background, so if you think about someone who's been, qualified at say 23 or something, and they get to 43, they've got 20 years experience. So, this is the sort of the golden years in that sense when you've got that experience, and then they are, if those people are dropping out, then you're losing. And of course, it's all the investment in the training of these people as well. And so you can lose very good staff, very good people, and you do lose that. And that uses, I think, in an organization, you lose the wealth of knowledge that you lose. So then, of course, you're having to obviously find people, recruit people, and that's obviously costing the business money. And it's obviously you've got to get, build up teams again. You lose someone, say, who's a very effective team lead. Yes, you can replace people, but it's going to have an impact on that workforce and the colleagues. And I think a lot of actual challenging situations, particularly for co-workers, because co-workers, there's a loss of morale as well when you lose people who are, someone like, someone who's literally someone who's been there and, a solid member of that team, or, a team lead or a manager, and then they're no longer there. And it's like that's very difficult. Replacing the knowledge and the skill sets, experience is, something that employees have and employers need to take on board. Yes, definitely.
And with people leaving, what are one of the most common reasons why people feel they have to leave that because of their life-changing situation?
Well, interestingly, I've had a couple of cases where people have had a bereavement. So one lady, she'd actually been her mother's carer for 13 years. And she had managed to hold her job. She actually also in HR herself, ironically, but she had managed to hold down her job during that time. And when her mother died, her one of her colleagues very how do I say it, basically said to her, well, it must be a relief for you now that your mother has gone because you don't have to look after her anymore. She didn't have any support at all. And then her husband literally died 3 months later from a massive heart attack. And she felt that her support was so lacking, she couldn't stay. So she's one of the 5% that Sue Ryder referred to who leave their jobs. And then I've had people who've been basically very high flyers in in financial industry, going through divorce, and one was couldn't basically concentrate on his work at all, ended up leaving because he just felt that his whole focus, my whole focus is my children. So, and he said to me I was in danger of making mistakes in my job. I wasn't sleeping at night. I was probably drinking too much, and I just couldn't concentrate, and I left. And so, what a great loss for someone. And if you think about, there are people out there who are making huge decisions, and they have huge financial budgets they're in control of, and they say, if I make a mistake, then a lot rests on me, and I just can't focus on it, and I've got to deal with this. And that's what I think that people don't always appreciate, or employers may not necessarily appreciate, is that the impact that these things have, that you do not leave these personal things at the door to the office. No matter what you say, there's going to be that voice in your head saying, am I going to see my children again? Or what's going to happen about this? Or what's happening about that? And you won't be fully focused. And that's, something that has to be taken into account.
Well, I mean, even getting into a car, maybe not even a big one, a car prang, or um,
Mm.
finding that some minor disaster at home has happened before you've had to go to work, can often send you into a tail spiral for at least the rest of that day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these and you could have, if you think about the things that we have that happen to us, as you say, literally on our days of work, it could put people in a good or bad mood. So you think about exactly a life-changing event or something that happens, and you can't think that it won't impact you. And then, of course, if there's also this issue that a lot of people maybe suppress emotion, and then sometimes it comes out at a later stage, and then that's when a lot of people have breakdowns. And so we will talk about not stuffing down emotions and actually dealing with things, which is not always easy when you're in a very tough workplace.
Mm. And what would you say would be just a couple of measures that employers could actually put into place? I mean, you've mentioned the communications and things like that. So having something readily available for people to say, oh, yes, I think I need some help. But I've known from lived experience that actually the help could have been offered all over the place. It would have taken perhaps somebody to verbalize that before I would have acted. But what else apart from that do you think that employers can do?
Well, again, I mean, training is something that is very useful. It's quite interesting actually when employers say, like, we're doing a workshop about this or something, so people have some idea of it, because a lot of people don't have any idea about what to do about any of these things when they happen. So obviously it's a two-way stretch, because an employer could have a policy and employees have got to be on board with it. So they do need to know about it. So if you are an employer and you do have a loss policy in place, then you do have to have a means of getting your employees to know about it. Now, some people might not want to think about it until it happens to them, because these are all issues that no one wants to think about until it happens to them. But it's creating that awareness that there is something there in place, so that if this happens, then you have someone to talk to. Also, when incidents have happened, and say someone is off work for a while for various things, there needs to be a policy in place which is getting people back into the workplace, and you know not just say leaving someone, keeping in touch with them and finding out how they are and if they need anything, and what arrangements are going to be made for when they come back, obviously depending on what's happened to them. And I think, as education of workforce. Now, there are some organisations have kind of work buddies. So there's sort of people there, not separate from that kind of mental health first aider, because I'm also a mental health first aider, but this is different from that. This is like a work buddy. So there are like people there. So say someone who's like in a manager or a team, who is someone that is a designated person that can look after people when they come back. And also, again, that's that conversation when people return, never knowing what to say to someone, and of course saying nothing. And when you say nothing, that saying nothing is worse than saying something. And people think,
Mm.
oh, I'll upset them. No, because it's like you just look at them and it's like they keep away from them. And it's like it happened, and it's acknowledging that, And people actually do appreciate that. If just saying, I'm sorry for your loss is actually, it makes a big difference to people, and ignoring it is not, because somebody comes back in and they think, well, no one said anything to me. And then it makes you feel more isolated.
Mm. When you know that probably people have talked about it, but just not to you. Yeah.
And I think as well, one of the things I've come across actually when I've approached employers to talk about loss, and someone said, well, we don't really want to get involved with this because all these issues are private matters. And I said, yes, they are private matters, but they unfortunately will, it's a ripple effect. As we've just said, you do not leave that private matter at the door to the office. And unfortunately, saying it's a private matter is not really the solution. That's not a solution at all. It's not helping someone who's been in that situation or is in that situation or might be in that situation down the line. So you have to take it on board because there are so many people out there right now who are going through a loss or something has happened and probably not getting the support that they need and feeling quite vulnerable and alone. And it's very isolating loss if you don't have support because the way we kind of developed our evolution is that we do grief needs to be witnessed. We do need people to, we need the support needs to be there. It is someone listening to you without judgment, without comment, just to listen. And a lot of the time, that's not kind of available to people, and it would make a big difference.
I'm also thinking as well is that the time that this takes to process for the individual that's going through it. And everybody means well, but sometimes, a week and 2 weeks isn't enough for the person
No.
who's going through it. But after that, people naturally think, well, that was old news in a way. We've done our bit and now let's get back to normal.
Yes.
How would you say
Yes.
to help employers and those teams of people knowing that actually this probably isn't going to be done and dusted within a week or 2 weeks?
No, and that's the thing. And so if, with a bereavement, I mean, people might be off a couple of weeks if they had, to deal with all the arrangements, the funeral arrangements, they come back. And then actually it's after that that the grief really kicks in for most people because up until that point, you're very busy doing things and you're having to focus on that, and you do have people running around and support, and then suddenly that's after the funeral, that's gone, and then you have that loss, and you're then actually in the stage of probably beginning to really grieve, and that's the point when a lot of people are going back into the office, and it's about being able to think about, well, how do we manage that? How do we think about, will there need to be time off to do things? Do we need to be a bit more flexible? I mean, this is one of the big things with divorce, because if someone has a court case, they might need time off, they might need to go and see their lawyer, all sorts of various things. So it's thinking about how can we be a bit more flexible and maybe work around this and see how this person goes, how much support that they actually need. Some people might not. They might find it, I have a couple of people I've worked with who found that they threw themselves back into work and that was their way of coping. Now, I've got to be careful with that as well because we get negative coping strategies. I'm a perfect example. I'm someone who literally threw myself into excessive work to not deal with grief. And then when my brother died, it hit me like a wall because I hadn't really processed any of the other. And that's what happens sometimes as well when you have, various scenarios and people think, why am I reacting to this? And I didn't feel that way when I lost that person, and it's because you didn't process it. And then again, when sometimes you could be, if someone's had a loss, they might be triggered by something which is not necessarily directly related to that loss, but something happens, somebody says something, and they can suddenly burst into tears or something because there are things that are very near the surface. And that's what we need to be aware of.
And with regards to hybrid working or working from home now as a matter of course, how can we help people that aren't actually in the office and work more remotely, or that we may have a sales team that are always
Yeah.
out or traveling internationally even. How can we help them?
Well, this is the importance of check-ins because we exactly when we do work remotely, you're not with people, you don't see people, so you don't necessarily know everything that's going on or you can't observe it. So checking in and making sure that people are okay is very important. And that is one of the things if you do have a team who does work remotely, then you have to be aware of, what's actually going on with people because, what behind the screen, you don't know.
Mm.
And yes, and so many people do work from home now. So it's a very different dynamic since lockdown because it's the norm. What was previously something that was, I think I worked from home 1 day a week um, when I was at the bank, and now it would probably be the other way around that you might go in because you have a meeting or something, you might need to be there, but other times you can work from home. So if you are someone who is managing people, it actually is difficult because you have to really be checking in and you have to see how people are. I mean, in some ways it's a little bit like, as a therapist or with coach when you have supervisors and you're checking in and talking about your work and how you're getting on and then the other things that come up that are, or have come up for you that might be impacting that. And I think that's quite a good way of helping people who work remotely.
Thank you. And as we come up towards the end, if you could think about now from the employee's perspective, the person who's going through this, what would be your top advice to somebody who has or is or knows imminently that they are going to be suffering loss, which in itself is actually really horrendous when you know that
Mm.
something is inevitable? Um, what would you say to them to be able to help that within their workplace?
I think, I think when you're talking about anticipatory grief when you know that something's going to happen. And it's it's a challenge because in the back of your mind all the time you are anticipating. But and it can sound trite, and someone said it to me when I had my brother because I knew that that was coming. But you just have to enjoy that time that you have with that person. And, unfortunately, grief and loss, pain that comes with that because we care and we can't avoid that. But what we can do is we can learn with time, we learn to manage. And everything has to be done in your own time. Grief is not linear, it's very different for everyone. Every single loss is different. And you might think, oh, when I lost my mother, I felt that way. When I lost my brother, I'm going to feel the same way. No, you don't. It depends on, circumstances, the nature of your relationship with that person, how they died. So again, so many variables, and it's like it's what is right for you, and how you feel is how you feel, and no feeling is final, but never let anyone else tell you how you should feel because only you know how you should feel. It's when you experience something like that, you have to realize that grief is so individual, but there are people out there who can help you. And I
And
think
on
that's the most
that,
important thing.
yeah, absolutely. Reaching out for help, it can be incredibly rewarding, so positive. And on that note, Celia, how can people get hold of you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me through my website, which is relationshipguru.com.
Wonderful. I think, there's a topic which, it's not going to set the world sort of yay, but actually it's a really, really valuable service to have within a business. And also, let's just say this, the CEO of a business is no more isolated from loss than the graduate or the person that's just come in the office. We are
No,
all humans, we all live in that dynamic. So a lot of
yes,
times leaders don't necessarily. reach out, or people in senior positions, because they're there thinking about the employees, but actually it's a service very much for them as well.
Exactly, exactly, because loss is something that will impact everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Celia, thank you so much
Thank you very
for being
much.
such a great guest. I've been listening very intently, and I just know that you'll be helping a lot of people. Be in touch with Celia as well, because um, it's something to, if we can get in advance of the situation, um, then perhaps there's some guidance that can be provided that would be much needed, especially for employers who are thinking, you know what, yeah, this would be something which would really be valuable for all concerned within the business. So, thanks everybody for listening. It's always wonderful to have you here, supporters. Do like, comment, subscribe, and share, because this could be something for somebody who could really make a difference to. Until next time, carry on caring. See you all again very soon. Bye bye now.